Hello there, folks. Inflation remains obscenely high at 8.7%. Truly awful news for everyone, really. But in the political world, especially awful news for the Conservatives, who were looking for a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, but have found only a brick wall. Various losers from this dead duck government have been quick to blame the Bank of England because, of course, nothing can ever be their fault. On this very subject, Jacob Rees-Mogg found himself under siege from both sides. The truly appalling Kelvin MacKenzie was gripping one of the Mogg's prized testicles from the right, and the other was firmly in the clenched palm of Matthew Stadlen from the left. The overall conclusion from both men, you ask? Basically, Jacob, you are finished, and you can kiss goodbye to the folk of northeast Somerset. Now, I know a lot of you will go after Kelvin MacKenzie. Rightfully so. He's an awful, awful, awful individual. However, the purpose of me posting this video is not necessarily to lay into anything Kelvin MacKenzie has to say. It's just a demonstration of how screwed the Conservative Party are at the next general election when Jacob Rees-Mogg here is being attacked from both the right and the left, and he is virtually a rabbit in the headlights with absolutely nothing to say. It's quite glorious, to be honest, so let's just play it and enjoy.
Kelvin, I'd better come to you first. Is this a summer of discontent? Is it reminiscent of 1978, 1979?
Not really, no. I mean, I obviously lived through that period, and that was an absolute nightmare. However, the difference this time is this was a Labour government that got it all wrong in the 70s. This one is a Conservative government. And honestly, Jacob, you are one of those that are responsible for this. You sat there in a cabinet while, honestly, we had a Prime Minister who decided to give money away. Remember, he was a former editor of The Spectator. He couldn't tell a balance sheet from a roll of cheese, right? And he just gave billions away. Billions that wasn't matched by production. You said, oh, you sit at home, take money, take 80% of your thing. Then after that, every shopkeeper in the country can come up with some kind of turnover which said you're entitled to 50,000 quid, right? We didn't produce anything at all. Nothing happened. What did you do about it? Did you feel so angry that you resigned from the government?
No,
Did you feel angry enough to actually quit the Conservative Party?
I thought that when we locked down, we couldn't bankrupt people when the government had ordered them to lock down. That if the government orders a lockdown, which certainly the first one I thought was right, you have to compensate people.
Jacob, good to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
It's also important to point out, I'm afraid, and I thought I was going to be taking on both of you this evening, but it seems that for the moment we're both taking you on because you're also business secretary during one of the most disastrous administrations in British history. That's the Liz Truss government, which lasted barely more than a month. And you were sitting there as a member of the cabinet, collective responsibility, as Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng destroyed the British economy. Now, you can point to Ukraine, of course you can, and the tragedy of what's going on there. You can point, of course, to the pandemic. Let's leave Brexit out of it for the moment. But you have to take some responsibility for where we are now yourself.
Well, of course, anyone who's been in government has to take some responsibility. But actually, the real issue last September was once again the Bank of England failing to increase interest rates at that point. You had the Federal Reserve going faster than the Bank of England. The Bank of England didn't do it. Yep. The currency collapsed. This did coincide with Kwasi's budget, but it was the bank that was failing. There are things
essentially wrong with our country, right? Working from home is a disaster. We have no productivity, right? Even Greece, by the way. And
I did try and stop that, if you'll give me a little bit of credit.
Yes, okay, I'll give you some credit. Right, so working from home is a disaster. People are doing less. Our productivity is going down at a moment we need to go up. If we want to pay any of our debts off, we have to work harder. We are idle. We are over-unionised. And nobody is prepared. And your government is a very... I know this is... Matthew will probably think this is amazing. This is a very, very liberal government. You've got a problem, here's a cheque. You've got a problem, here's a cheque. Benefit payments, as you know, that 10%, right,
yes,
have gone through the roof and was blamed. One of the things that was blamed, which is about the only thing I really agree with one of the reasons, was the reason why inflation stayed the same. So we are paying out money we do not possess. And this is a crisis which isn't going to end, as Rishi says, at the end of this year. Be right through to the election. Honestly, Jacob, you are done for. You will lose your seat in all this.
Jacob, it's very important to point out, because you rightly brought up the winter of discontent. I don't think we're quite where we were then. I was born at the end of 1979, so for the first 18 years of my life, it was a Tory government.
You lived in that golden age, the first 18 years of
Why
your
was
life.
there a Tory government? At least in the early years, there was a Tory government precisely because of the winter of discontent. When inflation is rampant, when people are suffering not just because of the cost of living, but because of corrective measures to try to bring down inflation, which then hits them doubly if they have a mortgage. Who are they going... Let me just quickly finish the point. Who are they going to blame, Jacob? You're being attacked on the right. You're being criticised on the left. You remember the phrase, as a historian of British politics, it's the economy stupid. Fast forward to the next general election, whenever we are granted one, and I predict that the Tories are going to get a hammering, because people, this is the last point, people will ask themselves, was I better off in 2019 or even 2010 than I am now? And they'll probably say, most of your viewers will probably say yes. Under those circumstances, how can they vote for your party?
That's a different issue, really. I think the consequences of economic policy are profound politically, but it's trying to work out what the causes are. And you mentioned Liz Truss, and I think, although it was handled badly, although things went wrong, but idiotic of me to pretend otherwise, actually what she was going for, economic growth and supply-side reforms, a healthier economy with deregulation, was the one way of helping with the inflation.
We aren't producing. Brexit. I agree with the chap on one of your mail mugs, right, who described Brexit as a disaster. You must accept, even a year into it, and by the way, we're now 7 years since we voted for it, that had we known that this was going to happen, right, there would not have been a majority.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all. That we
give me one example of how it's worked for the economy. Let's talk
we've
about
saved
the economy.
£191 billion, £191 billion by not being part of the EU.
What do you mean? Do you mean the annual payment? You mean?
No, 191 billion of extra payment that the EU has taken on because of its COVID recovery plan of €2 trillion.
Jacob, I'll say one thing in your favour. I'll say one thing in your favour, and that is that exports, global exports, British global exports, seem to be at a record high. Now, the question, of course, is, would they have been at a record high had we not Brexited? But let me just put this question to you, because I think it's a valid one. You won that referendum because you had a coalition. You had Boris Johnson, you had some on the left, you had Jeremy Corbyn dragging his feet, but you also had another very key participant, ally, and that was Nigel Farage. He has just vacated this very studio. He said a few weeks ago he is disappointed with how Brexit has gone. Where do you stand? Are you happy with where Brexit is at the moment? Because you were in charge of the effects of Brexit, delivering Brexit.
I was in charge of the retained EU law bill, which the government gutted, which was the best way of getting the deregulation that we need to get some economic growth. We're going to have to come back. We'll probably discuss Brexit tomorrow. But thank you to my panel.
So there we have it. He was a crap minister for Brexit opportunities, although, as we know, there weren't any. He was a crap business minister. He sat on his hands and said nothing, whilst Truss and Kwarteng unleashed chaos on our finances. Probably because, by the way, they were all in on it and shorting the pound. I could go on and on and on. Ultimately, he is a useless politician who has only ever been in the game for his own self-interest. And how pathetic his one pushback came in the form of his retained EU law bill being heavily amended from the bonfire he had initially proposed. Imagine being as buffoonish to believe the creation of that ridiculous bill is some kind of achievement. I cannot stress the economic, political, and legal uncertainty his version of the retained EU law bill would have caused on this already broken country. But hopefully both Kelvin and Matthew are correct, and Mogg is completely finished, along with the rest of them. I don't care who it comes from, it's always a pleasure to see Mogg's ass handed to him. He had nothing to say. Absolutely nothing. Blaming the Bank of England, blaming Kemi Badenoch for amending his bill. Nothing's my fault. Nothing. Whilst he was neck deep in these governments. Neck deep in Boris Johnson's government. Liz Truss's government. But nothing is ever his fault. Cheers for watching. I'll catch you again soon.